A much-loved post-resurrection story from Luke. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognising him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognised him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." In this is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This is a busy week this week when Easter lands right around to Anzac Day and all that sort of stuff. So thank you. It's been giving me a little bit of space just to think and to pray. I'm wondering whether you've ever been surprised. We read a gospel reading this morning of two disciples who get the surprise of their lives, really. And I'm wondering whether you've ever been surprised, maybe not to that extent that we read about this morning, but have you ever been surprised or jolted or had something be renewed within you, something awakened within you that came through an interaction with an unexpected person? Or maybe you were in an unexpected place and maybe something happened around you that just made you come awake, made you come alive, where your perception or your understanding of things were totally flipped. Maybe it was even the nature of a relationship. Have you ever been in a circumstance where you've gone from, where you've gone from being the teacher to being the pupil, like that, where someone's taught you something? Or have you ever been in a relationship where someone else has gone from being the client, or perhaps they've gone from being the client or someone you're kind of got the lead in the relationship with to being where they're now a colleague, like they're talking equally with you about things that you thought they weren't ready. That took me by surprise. I've learned something here. Have you ever had a conversation with someone where it's been very clear that they've gone from being someone who's out to someone who's in, and it took you totally by surprise? Someone whose language shifts from you and those and them to us and we about something, about a common goal. Have you ever been with someone whose life is shifting, where before their life was dead or perishing within them, and suddenly something's come alive? It's a real privilege, it's a real gift to be in those kind of circumstances. And it's very hard for Christians to think about these things when it comes to the faith, because we've all been conditioned, and I've been conditioned like many of you. I've been and done evangelism courses, I've been and done discipleship courses, I've learned how to talk and share the gospel. I'm the one with the knowledge, I'm the one with the skills, I'm the one with something to impart that you don't have. I'm the one who's got it all together. And that's sometimes how people think, Christians think about ourselves. We're the ones who have got it all together. We're the ones who will help without needing anything in return. That there'll be help without interaction, perhaps sometimes. We've kind of seen it as our job to do the jolting and the surprising of others. That's what good Christians do. And maybe we've fallen asleep in many ways to when other people are coming alive, apart from by the formula that we know. Sometimes many of us are kind of Christian people are asleep. We've become dull or numb, or to borrow from the word of Jesus, foolish. In other words, we're sort of missing the point. To the Spirit of God alive and working in the lives and the stories of other people. If it doesn't happen the way that we've been taught, that we've got to share it and how it does work, then maybe that's not the Spirit of God working at all. And that's a little bit like the disciples today. They were the ones who had the knowledge. They were the ones who were there at the event. They had seen what had happened. They had the story to tell. That the women had been to, that Jesus had been into Jerusalem that weekend and he'd been killed and, suffered and died and crucified. The women had gone to the tomb. He wasn't there. The disciples were the ones with the story to tell. And they know how the story went. And they were the ones who knew how the pieces of the story to go together And it ends in confusion and being perplexed and in grief. It was their story to tell. That's the way they were telling it. Fair enough too. I don't want to sound like I'm coming down too hard on the disciples. Sometimes there are people in Scripture who I feel for because I want to be able to say, you know what, I'm sorry that's been written about you, and we read it 2,000 years later and we make judgments about you, about what you must have been like and how foolish you must have been. And we would never have been anything like that, right? I would have been with them. Totally would have been with them. But that's how the story was unfolding, and they were the carriers of that story. But maybe like them, and maybe if you like, the point of the story as I read it this morning, 2,000 years later, what do we kind of get out of it, is how do we be awake to resurrection when it's going on around us? How do we be awake to the work of the Spirit of God, bringing people to life when it's going on around us? And you might say, well, there's a number of... I can go walk around any cemetery, any gravesite around there, and there's no one seems to have come back up out of there. True. But I want to tell you, I think resurrection is happening all around us, within us, and sometimes through us. And today's homily is all about how do we be awake to that? How do we be part of that movement rather than a stumbling block or a grumbler or a disbeliever that it's happening, or just numb to it, not awake to it? How do we stop ourselves from just landing people in this place where we think they are, that they're never going to change? I want to tell you a story. It comes from this week. Can you put a photo up for me? There's a photo coming up now. That's a picture from Christmas Day. And it's a picture of Richard, and who's a regular to Ensmeet, and one of our volunteers from Christmas Day. They'd never met each other before that day, but they had a great time. I remember seeing them in lots of conversation together. Sadly, Richard passed away last weekend. He died at home. He lived up on the avenue, and he passed away at home. Chrissy rang me up on Monday to let me know that the word was getting around. Thank you, Chrissy. And by Tuesday morning, we were getting some messages from our Facebook Messenger from Richard's sister-in-law. Now, if you haven't met Richard before, and if you don't know, Richard is someone who just used to wander around Corrimal. You sometimes see him outside Corrimal Square, the mall over here. You see him up at the square. Richard was it kind of defied his appearance. That you might be able to see he's got tattoos all over him. He looks a bit rough and a bit gruff, and he was missing a few teeth, and he had rough skin. Gary Scott shared with me that George Lemon used to be worried about Richard based on his appearance. So that tells you something about how Richard looked. He could look quite daunting, perhaps, to somebody else if you didn't know him. But not even underneath, outwardly, he was quiet, gentle, had a kind heart. He could see other people. He didn't do very much. He used to sit at Ensmeet and just be there at the table and be there for a conversation. Just be a gentle presence. He's a sort of guy that very regularly now at Ensmeet, there's a bunch of people who come from a disability service called Branch, and they were quite happy to sit around Richard. They were quite happy to have him at their table. And I came to know Richard as a friend. I want to tell you another story about Richard. He was a bit scruffy. And one of my... You know how you have to learn things about people sometimes. One of my very first weeks at Ensmeet, I came along, and I was here, and Richard came along, and Richard only ever had an ability of one hand, because the other hand was always holding his pants up, because he refused to wear a belt, right? And one of my very first interactions with Richard, I said to him, we've got an op shop, do you want me to go over and get a belt for you? He said, yes. So I went over, I took time away from Ensmeet, got a belt for him, brought it over him, gave him the belt, and every other week, and he put it on, and every other week after that, he never wore a belt. So I really loved Richard, and he and I became friends. He's a Crystal Palace supporter. He told me about how he grew up in London, and I'm a Liverpool supporter. And if you follow the English Premier League at all, you'll know this year that Liverpool are on top of the table. But Richard was always let me know that one of the two losses, or the only loss they'd had at that point, was to Crystal Palace. So it's kind of like we had good conversations. So Richard's sister contacts us, right, through Messenger. And one of the things that she said, because they were trying to work out when did Richard die? That they knew that the last time he'd been sighted was Wednesday before last, when he'd been to the doctors, and they'd phoned him that afternoon. And then they did a welfare check on Monday to discover he was at home, passed away at home. And they were just trying to work out when he might have died. And in the middle of it all, Richard's sister says to me, he loved your church. She said to me, so did you see him at all? Was he at church services over Easter? Now, I don't know about you, but has anybody here ever seen Richard at church on Sunday? No, I haven't. I'd never seen. And that was my initial reaction. And I kind of said back to her, I said, oh, no, we didn't see him at Easter. We'd never kind of really seen. And she said, oh, she said, he really loved your church. I was asleep for a moment, for a little while, because what I was asleep to was this sense that Richard felt connected and part of belonging of who we are. I was asleep to that, totally asleep to that. She was under the impression that Richard came to worship. The story Richard was telling his family, because he used to have weekly phone calls with his family, the story he was clearly telling them was that he was part of our church. And I guess that he spoke fondly of us to other people. And I guess it came when I sort of woke up a second, it made me realise, when I became awake to the life that was going on. I know Richard came regularly to Ends Meet. I think he sometimes dropped in at the op shop. I'm not sure if your volunteers know Richard by face. But he considered himself to belong, to be part of who we are. And in a sense, we were part of Richard being not just physically alive, but we were part of the life that he had. He's spoken of very fondly in our local community. And I'd like to think that part of the fuel for that came from being part of us on Wednesdays at Ends Meet. His contribution to our community was his gentle, kind presence. And the fact that if ever we had any leftover desserts, Richard would take them home. Food didn't go to waste. Now, this is happening not just at Ends Meet. I know this. We've got stories all around us of people coming to life. People whose lives were on the down. People whose lives were perishing, which is the literal biblical phrase. People whose lives are kind of just numb or lost or broken, hurting, pained, and who somehow, through connection with us, find a bit of life, a bit of connection, a bit of belonging, somewhere to make a contribution, somewhere where they're valued, somewhere where they're part of something bigger. It happens not just at Ends Meet. I could tell you stories, but these are people whose names I haven't asked if I can use their names. But we've got people who have come through the op shop as volunteers, who have found another way to be part of who we are, and have joined in with other things that we're doing. We've got people from Living English who have come to part of coming to life has been by joining in with us, belonging with us. Men's Shed's another story. But it goes bigger than that. It goes when you and I are out on the street and having every interaction. And it could be at work. It could be in any social club or anything you're a part of. It could be your neighbours. It can be with family. How do we be awake to the people when things have been really tough? Or when life has been tough for a long, long time? How do we be awake that when life is starting to come back together? And what's our part in that? One of the values that we have as an organisation is transformation. Taking those slow steps with people as they start to regain life and turn things around. Our vision as an organisation is finding life through finding God. We have this hope. We have this sense that people will find life about themselves when they join into something bigger. We call it God. But that kind of spirit of working for the common good, which is fueled by God. So we should be awake when people are starting to make changes. When people are seeing a different way that they can be themselves in a more useful or productive or joined in, included kind of way. And we've got lots of stories about all that, where people are coming to life. We do it through our mission, growing community and connection for all. It's one of the things that you guys are fantastic, brilliant at, is including people. That our starting point is how do we include, not how do we judge, to make sure we're getting the right people in, the right people out. That's your superpower. It's a gift. So I just want to share, just for the last bit of what I've got to say, is how do we be part of God's movement of the Spirit, of transformation, of resurrection in our world today? What are some clues? What are some things? And I've just got 5. You might be sitting there and I might not list anything that goes near what you're thinking. That's okay. Talk to me later. I'll grow my list. Next time I share it, I'll go longer. All right? But for me, it's stuff like be open. Have a starting point of being open. Being open to being surprised. Allow yourself to be gently or joltedly surprised. Actually, I'm going to go to a list of 6 because what I want to say now is the second thing is let's celebrate it when it happens, hey? That's one of our values as well. Celebrate with someone encourage someone when you can see change going on. I really love this in you. This is fantastic. The second thing I want to say, and I learned this one from, this became really, has anyone seen Ted Lasso? Do you remember the dartboard scene? This comes from Ted Lasso. Don't be closed, be inquisitive. Ask questions of people. Don't assume by someone's outward appearance that you know what they're like. Don't assume because you've seen tough or bad behaviour in somebody that that's what they're always like either. Be inquisitive. Ask questions. What's going on for you today? Find out about them. Take the starting point that you've got something to learn, not something to impart. Be gracious. Allow room for people to be different. People have all sorts of different journeys in life, all sorts of understandings of God, all sorts of journeys with Jesus, people have all kinds of different ways of approaching things. And being open to resurrection is about being open to learning. That's what goes on for the disciples in our story today. They quickly caught it and off they went. Being open to resurrection. Not trying to keep someone stuck. I know they're always like this, or we can't trust them because of. Start to, in your own heart, to tell a different story that has a different starting point with somebody. I've got this. Journey with. Now we talk about this a fair bit. Journey with. Don't journey for them. Don't journey ahead of people. You can't want something more for somebody than they want it for themselves, right? It doesn't go anywhere. Journey with. That's what the whole passage is about. The journey with. Part of that journey, and the phrase, the thing Ross really gave it a good emphasis this morning. I love that. Thanks, Ross. This is what I'm about to share. Did you notice that the point when the disciples came awake, it wasn't the amazing teaching from Jesus about that would have been part of it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it didn't need that, but there's this part of the passage where Jesus has done all this listening to all that's gone wrong, and then Jesus starts to give them this lesson on who the Messiah would be, and how it all came together through the Old Testament scriptures as they had them in the first century. That didn't wake them up. What woke the disciples up was what? The breaking of the bread. The doing life together in its normal, everyday, ritualistic, and yet somehow sacred moment. We know what that means. The breaking of the bread, we know what that means. Oh, this is the Messiah. It's the breaking of the bread that points out who Jesus is, the Messiah. And that's what I'm trying to say here. Do the journey with. Break bread. Whatever it is you need to do with people, whatever it is you can do with people that is journeying with when they're coming alive, when they're coming awake. Journey with. My last one is this. Hope for the best. Don't expect the least. Hope for the best. Expect the best. Praise the best. That's the celebration bit. Praise the best when it turns up. Help bring out the best in others. I think that's how we can be as a community of people, but also as individuals in our everyday walk and everyday life, being awake and being part of God's work of resurrection around us. I'm going to drop this in. It may not quite fit, but Ron came in this morning with a quote from Pope Francis, right? Just read the deceased Pope, who shared something. I'm sorry if I don't say it correctly, but the church is meant to be more like a field hospital than a fortress, right? And I don't know where you picture yourself in that kind of picture. But it being a field hospital to me means that we're kind of getting well together. Yeah, sure, okay, there's a couple of people around who know more than others about how to make that happen. But we're getting well together. Another one that I shared back with Ron is this one. It's a phrase that I haven't used here, but I think you probably might have heard it before anyway. Is that the church is one of the few community organisations that exists for the benefit of its non-members. The church is one of the few community organisations. There's a few, we're not the only ones. I can think of the Lifesavers, Red Cross, there's others around. But we're one of the few community organisations that exist for the benefit of our non-members. The members find life by being part of God's movement of helping everyone come to life. That's how I see the Spirit working amongst us. Bringing us to life, bringing others around us to life. Friends, the Spirit is alive and at work. Around us, in us, through us. And my call today is that we will continue to be awake and alert to where that's happening. That transformation and resurrection are not just stuck in the first century. They're happening all the time. life is happening. The Spirit of God is at work bringing new life all the time. And for that, we can thank God. Amen.